Okay, welcome back to our second installment on Reconstruction. With Lincoln's assassination in April of 1865, his vice president, Andrew Johnson, takes the helm. Now, where Lincoln was a Republican, Johnson's actually a Democrat, and he's not going to get along with the Republican Party in Congress. And Johnson kind of agrees with Lincoln that the states had never legally left the Union, and therefore they didn't have to apply for statehood through Congress. He also kind of agreed with Lincoln's kind of mild and forgiving, respect when it came to dealing with these southern states. Now, as a Southern Democrat, Johnson, however, was anti-aristocrat. He was kind of against these big planter elites, but at the same time, he was a racist. So when it came to his Reconstruction plan, it was pretty minimal, as he was offering amnesty upon a simple oath to any Confederate civil or military officers who applied for one. He just thought simply if these southern states, repudiated slavery, secession, and their states' debts, that they could resume their normal state governments. So with Johnson's minimal approach in dealing with the South and all the pardons he was giving out to the planter elites, it kind of seemed like the white Southerner was kind of coming back to power. And with that, they passed codes and laws to try to limit the rights and lives of the newly freed men and women in the South, and become known as the Black Codes. Now, these codes a lot of times regulated the daily lives of the freedmen, and they might include certain things like there's curfews. They couldn't be out after sundown. They had to have passes to move from town to town. They couldn't have big meetings. They had to prove that they were employed, or they risked being arrested and sent off to some plantation to work almost like slave labor. But it was meant to try to keep the old social hierarchy in the South that existed before the Civil War. So with these plantation owners having land but no labor, and the freedmen being able to provide labor and not own any land, black codes sometimes established a sharecropping system, which forced many blacks to the kind of work on the same plantations that they did when they were slaves. And basically the way it worked was they were provided tools and seed and some land that they had to work, and at the end they had to turn over some of their harvest to the plantation owner, and they got to keep some themselves to try to sell and make some money and make a living off of. But many times they'd fall in debt. They couldn't pay back what they owed, and it was no way for them to make a good economic living. And basically it tied them to the same land that they had once worked before. So with the Republican members of Congress upset that the planter elite were regaining control in the South, and that the freedmen really weren't living that good of lives, they wanted to do more. So they passed through Congress in June of 1866 the 14th Amendment. However, it never gets ratified by the states until July of 1868. Now, this amendment would extend civil rights to all people. It would provide a constitutional guarantee of the rights and security of the freedmen, and kind of ensure against a kind of neo-Confederate political power. Try to keep the old Confederate elite from regaining the control they once had. And so at this point, we kind of see a continuing escalation of hostilities between the president and Congress. For in 1866 as well, President Johnson vetoes an extension of the Freedmen's Bureau and the 1866 Civil Rights Act, both of which were eventually overturned or passed by Congress over Johnson's veto, which is the first time Congress is able to do that in the nation's history. And that kind of leads to the 1866 midterm elections and a referendum on radical Reconstruction. For in that year, the kind of debate and the centerpiece of the debate was, the 14th Amendment. People had a decision to kind of go down the route of Andrew Johnson and be lenient on the South and kind of give them back their states' rights, or, take the radical Republicans approach. And with his vetoes, it kind of contributed to the growth of the radical Republican movement, which favored increased intervention in the South and more aid to the former slaves. And so, with the radical Republicans gaining control of more seats in Congress, they were able to pass the Reconstruction Act of 1867, which set standards for the South to be readmitted and included the passage of the 13th and 14th Amendments. It also established military districts in the South. Actually, 5 of these military districts, each one being headed up by a federal general and supervised, with the support of his troops. And they were there to kind of guarantee the rights and freedoms of these former slaves and to make sure that their citizenships and voting rights were being protected. And so you can kind of imagine how white Southerners would feel about this federal presence in the South. But as one might assume, Johnson does veto the Reconstruction Act of 1867, only for this measure to be overridden by Congress later on. Congress also approves that the military be used to enroll eligible black voters and begin the process of making these new state constitutions. And what you see, where freemen outnumber white citizens, they're actually not only going to come out to vote, but they're also going to be electing African Americans into different leadership positions, both at the state and federal level. And so, with the relationship between Johnson and Congress quickly deteriorating, Congress passes the Tenure of Office Act, which was designed to protect radical members left from Lincoln's tenure in office. What this act said was that the Senate must approve any presidential dismissal of cabinet officials or generals in the Army. And in February of 1868, Johnson fired Edwin Stanton, his Secretary of War, and replaced other generals who were sympathetic to radical Reconstruction. This was in violation of the Tenure of Office Act. And therefore, the House voted to impeach him in February of 1868, and things were turned over to the Senate, where after the 11-week trial, Johnson was saved by being only one vote short of the necessary 2/3 vote in the Senate of dismissing him. Now, really, there was a question of constitutionality of Congress's attempts to control the president. It's not that he had really done anything that he wasn't allowed to do or abuse his power. It was simply that Congress didn't like how lenient he was and how he didn't go along with the radical Republicans' wishes. It was their attempt to kind of try and control the president. But being that there's a new election coming up in November of 1868, Johnson won't be in office much longer anyways. But we'll take a look at the end of Reconstruction in our next episode.